I got a chance to spend some time in St. John's this summer when the Canadian Psychological Association's National Convention took place there in June. I didn't get a chance to do too many tourist-type things, though I did make a brief stop at Signal Hill because, Marconi radio communications, it's in my wheelhouse. But I was thinking that the bulk of the locations we Canadians think about in Newfoundland, like Signal Hill or L'Anse aux Meadows, Battle Harbour, the Cape Spear Lighthouse, they're all pretty Eurocentric. Newfoundland became a province in 1949, and at that time the Indigenous people who lived there and the culture they carried with them were basically ignored. It's a long way to true reconciliation, and we're not there yet. My name is Eric Bowman. I'm the Communications Specialist at the Canadian Psychological Association, and this is Mindful. Every year at our convention, the CPA sells orange t-shirts designed by Indigenous artist Betty Albert and donates the proceeds to an Indigenous organization that does work in the area. This year, that recipient was First Light, an Indigenous-led organization dedicated to the community, culture, and connection of Indigenous Newfoundlanders in St. John's.
Oh, nice to meet you. My name is Stacey Howse, and I'm the president and CEO of First Light St. John's Friendship Center Incorporated here in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. Originally, I'm from Mi'kmaq First Nation, also known as Conne River. I'm a Mi'kmaq woman. Lived my whole life growing up on the reserve in Conne River, and then left to attend post-secondary, moved to St. John's to attend Memorial University, found the Friendship Center, and never left almost 20 years later, obviously in different roles. I started as a summer student and worked majority with programs with youth, and I've been in this leadership position for the last about 4 years.
Terrific. Well, and I see that First Light works primarily with urban Indigenous communities, and I expect that most of those urban Indigenous communities have a similar story to yours, that they grew up elsewhere and ended up in St. John's. Is that an accurate assessment?
100%. That's something that we see a lot of people that grew up, like myself, in remote, small, isolated communities, had no other choice to leave to continue education, or maybe it was later in life to find employment or medical needs or whatever the case may be. Often it's some kind of resource or support that is not offered in our own communities. So we end up having to leave our communities, travel to these bigger cities, attend these institutions that we have no idea about, trying to navigate it with no support, no cultural connection, no one that really understands what we're going through. And so that is why the Friendship Centers exist, to provide that support for individuals looking to better their lives, but also have that connection, support, and that cultural component that we wouldn't otherwise get anywhere else. And First Light is the only Indigenous organization that exists in St. John's.
And that cultural connection is so important, especially for people coming from elsewhere. But it's also something that you guys, it looks like you're really into highlighting all of the cultural history, the languages, and that sort of thing that I imagine, as the only Indigenous organization in St. John's, is so important.
100%. You know, Eric, like so many people do not understand the history of Indigenous people here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and it's not in the school system, it's not in the curriculum. And matter of fact, there were some inaccurate information in existing social studies books about the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq people, which differ tremendously from our oral history and from, information that was passed down to us. And so we've been working a lot to, teach the history. When Newfoundland joined Canada in 1949, and the current premier at the time, Joey Smallwood, had no mention of Indigenous people. He said there were no Indigenous people in this province. And so then we were not receiving the rights that we rightfully held like other Indigenous people in the country. And we were left out of that because we were left out of the terms of union. And in my own community of Conn River, we had many, many struggles with the government, and the federal government finally released some funds to the province. The province was withholding it from our community. There's actually a fantastic documentary on CBC Gem. It's called Forgotten Warriors, and it will tell you the whole story of my community in particular about the struggles of working with the provincial government and the fight that they had to do. They actually went on an 8-day hunger strike in order to receive what was rightfully theirs.
Forgotten Warriors, you said?
Yes, that's right. Forgotten Warriors on CBC Gem.
All right, we'll put a link to that in the show notes so people who are listening can check that out as soon as they're done here. Now, you're on your way to a ribbon cutting this morning. Tell me a little bit about that. What's going on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in my car right now. I'm driving to Vida Nova Recovery Center, which is a new treatment center that is opening in our province on Salmon Line. And actually, that land is really important to our people because we've actually been using the land out around Bury Heights and Labrock, which was previously called, for many, many years, because in the city, access to land and land-based activities can be challenging. And we've actually been going out to the Salmon Line for many years and hosting language and culture camps there. So all of our people will come together, learn Indigenous languages, participate in cultural activities. We've been ice fishing out there. We've been in sweat lodge ceremonies out there. I've taught a rabbit skinning workshop out there with a bunch of youth. That land and that space holds a lot of significance for us. So we were really happy to see that a treatment center is going to be on there, because I believe that one of the biggest healing tools is being connected to the land, especially for our people, Indigenous people who are struggling with addictions. Being connected to the land in a treatment center, I think, will have such great outcomes for the people who are participating in that treatment program. And so we like to partner with many different organizations and help as much as we possibly can. I was speaking to the operators and the leadership at Vida Nova, and already they're not even open yet. They're open on September 8th, but already the two of the residents will be Indigenous residents from Labrador, and they're asking us, how can we help make sure they have funding for this? How can we help make sure that, they are culturally supported? How can we add activities that are tied to their culture to make sure that they are the most successful that they can be? And, of course, we want to help that. So I'm driving out this morning, checking out the space, and we are actually about to open our own Indigenous health clinic in our new headquarters. And so, this is the exact type of work that we want to be in order to help our community members.
I see that in First Light, a lot of the focus is on housing. And I'm hoping you could tell me just a little bit about the housing situation in St. John's right now. What is that situation? What are some of the difficulties? What are some of the challenges in terms of housing in general and within the Indigenous community in the urban area?
Well, my goodness, there is a housing crisis. And that is no secret. And the visibility of that, I feel, just increases every day, especially if you're in the downtown core area. You can see how much our community is really struggling. And, we work on a housing first model. If you look at, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, our community members, we can't expect them to go out and get these successful jobs and be contributing members of society if there's no roof over their head. And then what often comes with being houseless is often other challenges as well and other barriers. And so we can't just do housing. Housing also has to come with food insecurity and, mental health and addictions issues and all of these challenges, which is why, First Light offers wraparound services. So we're one organization. We have many different teams of people that focus on different areas, but we all work together towards the common goal of, putting our community members and culture at the core of everything we're doing and making sure that we can help urban Indigenous people be as successful in life as they possibly can.
Yeah, I like the housing first model. I think it's the most obvious one, right? Like, no matter how many support services there are available, the number one way to get those supports to anybody is to have some sort of stability in terms of their housing. But the big problem appears to be funding. What's that situation like right now?
Absolutely. Funding is always a challenge, I believe. There's been some great initiatives with CMHC. We were able to get funding through CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, to open up a new transitional housing unit called Harvey House on Water Street. So we'll take in 10 residents, relatives. So we're calling them our relatives, the individuals who will be living there. And we have 15 units at another location. So in total, we'll have 25 units. And so we were very fortunate to get support from NLHS, CMHC, Indigenous Services Canada, Reaching Home. So there are some initiatives through the government that will support housing initiatives, which is really great to see because it is such a huge necessity. But of course, it's not enough because there are just so many people who are struggling in so many different ways. But that's another reason why, First Light does all these initiatives and all these programs and supports, but we're also trying to put a social enterprise spin on things so that we can generate our own revenue so that we won't be 100% self-reliant, like 100% reliant on the government. We want to be self-reliant. We want to be, we want to make sure that our funding is sustainable. We're bringing in our own revenue so that we can help our community members with what we know they need help with.
I'm a big believer in social enterprise. Can you tell me a little bit about some of those programs that you've got going?
Absolutely. So we have a child care center. So that acts as one of our social enterprise right from birth, right up until school age. They're at our registered daycare. And that acts as a social enterprise because there is a fee because we're under the operating grant program with the province. So any revenue we get from that goes back into our programs and services. And we also have a performance space. So we have the Cochrane Street United Church. We've taken over operations there, and the sanctuary is now our performance space. We rented out some of the best acoustics in the province, maybe even like this side of the country. We rented out the choirs, different shows, theater, a lot for the arts community there. That acts as a social enterprise as well. In that building, we also have a commercial kitchen and event spaces, which we also rent to community partners or external stakeholders as well. We have a medical transportation program, which acts as a social enterprise. So we have contracts with the Indigenous governments so that when their members need to leave the community and come into the city for medical reasons, we have a fleet of transportation that can pick them up from the airport, bring them to the hospital. We have Indigenous patient navigators, which helps navigate the healthcare system and, make sure that those medical clients are really cared for while they're here already in a stressful time. We also have our training business, which we are about to transition into more of a experiential learning training program, kind of modeled after the Banff Center. And that acts as a social enterprise as well. Yeah, I think that's about it for our social enterprises, but I'm sure we will probably have more in the near future.
Excellent. You mentioned patient navigators, and I was thinking about that. This summer, I was out in Brandon in Manitoba. It was my aunt's 75th birthday, and we stayed at a local motel, and it was full of Indigenous people who are from northern communities who had to evacuate because of wildfires. And they ended up in that motel and then trying to get around in that city. And I mean, Brandon's not a huge city, maybe the size of St. John's, I'm not sure, but it's right. It's something that with which they're so unfamiliar that trying to just get the most basic services, get on the bus and go somewhere is a difficult thing. I'm wondering, with the wildfires this summer, has there been an enormous increase in demand in the urban areas?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we were really unfortunate because while the wildfires were at the height of, all the concern, the Canada Summer Games were also taking place at the same time. And, because of the Canada Summer Games and just the amount of people that were here in St. John's, hotels, Airbnbs, everything was booked up. So we actually had medical clients who were at the hospital for treatment that got discharged, but yet couldn't get a flight home. And so they were kind of just stuck, right? So like we've been seeing situations like that, and we've been helping out as much as we can. We're really fortunate because we do have another building called the Lunar Inn that was like a medical hostel. We decided to shift that into a more experiential training retreat. But however, we still are able to help community members when there are emergency situations such as the wildfires, someone getting discharged from hospital, no hotels or anywhere to stay. So we were able to help them out by letting them stay in that location of ours.
And I imagine, like, every time there is a natural disaster anywhere in Canada, it seems to affect Indigenous communities first and more so before any other community. Has that been a strain on the resources that you guys have?
Yeah, well, I can't really, we're really fortunate here in St. John's that, like, there are a lot more wildfires in other locations and areas. They're more used to it, like Alberta, Edmonton, these areas. Of course, they are much more exposed to the elements and, these natural disasters. And thankfully, that is not, and hopefully it won't become a common thing that we are experiencing. I really hope not. But, we've been fortunate not to have too many natural disasters that we really have to come together. Of course, COVID, that was probably one of the biggest for everyone in the world. But, we were able to get a lot of support from our National Association of Friendship Centers and Indigenous Services Canada. But yeah, I think that, whenever there's any type of emergency or natural disaster, like community organizations you usually see are the first to kind of step up, boots to the ground. How can we help? How can we start, helping people in the community?
Now, you mentioned you've got a performance center. You do demonstrations like a rabbit skinning demonstration. Is this for the larger community to sort of bring them into a greater understanding of Indigenous culture?
Absolutely. I mean, all of our programs and services are open to everyone. We do not get into identity politics or identity policing or anything like that. We have an open door policy. We don't care what your background is. If you're Indigenous, awesome, come connect with your culture. If you're non-Indigenous, awesome, come and learn about the Indigenous culture. And, that was one of the reasons why we changed our training format. We used to have a very academic, slides, worksheets, like someone speaking at you, teaching you about the Indigenous people. But we're like, you know what? We need to change this up. We've been doing this now for about a decade. And yes, it's great, and we've been successful, and we've got a lot of great feedback, but there's still some gaps. And so we, really started to do a lot of engagement with our staff and with community members and elders and knowledge keepers, and said, what is the best way to learn? The best way to learn is when you're actually involved, you're immersed in it, you're participating. So yes, you learn about the history, and Indigenous people weren't included in the Terms of Union in 1949, and this is the history of residential schools in our province. But you may do that in a circle while you're sitting with a residential school survivor who's telling you her story, how she was personally impacted. You may learn about cultural activities and the importance of the land, but you can go on the trail retreat and pick some berries, go back and make berries and bannock, berry jam, blueberry jam and bannock, so like these very interactive, immersive, experiential activities we feel are the best way for anyone to learn, but especially non-Indigenous people when they want to learn about Indigenous culture.
And what have been some of the longer term results that have come from this? Have you seen community rapprochement, a greater understanding in the wider community over time, having done these things over the course of, like you said, 10 years doing this?
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many success stories that I can talk to you about, like community members, community organizations, but you know what? They're the easier ones. Let me tell you, the harder ones are the government, right? Like it's easier to educate community members, community organizations, people that have like-minded kind of views. The government, the institutions that have so much red tape and so much colonial history just like ingrained in their whole existence. And a lot of these institutions that actually cause harm to our communities, they are the ones that are a bit more challenging, right? So our relations with the municipal, provincial, and federal government. Now, I will say that one of the biggest success from this educational component is probably our partnership with the city of St. John's. And so, it's been touch and go for years and years and years, but within the last, I'd say, 5 years since we started a partnership table and a lot of our advocacy work, we've actually formed a really solid partnership with the city of St. John's to the point where they have actually 100% funded a Indigenous liaison position, an employee that works at First Light, but their sole responsibility is to connect to the initiatives and alignment and partnerships between the city of St. John's and ours, working towards the calls to change, towards reconciliation in the city of St. John's. And that's probably one of our biggest successes.
Oh, that's terrific. And does that mean that your organization and that this liaison is involved in some of the decision making that goes on in the city? I don't know, urban planning things, that sort of deal?
100%. We're making sure that, there's an Indigenous voice and perspective at every level of decision making.
And can you maybe give me an example of how that's worked, maybe something that has been changed as a result of having that Indigenous voice at the table?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are quite a few different examples. A lot of the work that we have been doing is to increase visibility in the city of St. John's. Like, when I moved here almost 20 years ago now, you don't see Indigenous culture represented. You don't see yourself represented in the artwork, in the structures that exist in the city. One of the things that we've been really working with the city on is to really increase visibility of Indigenous people. So there's been some murals, some artwork, putting Indigenous artwork in council chambers, making sure that it's seen on like the street work and the sites in the city. So like we've been working with them to develop requests for proposals, working with Indigenous artists, doing call-outs to Indigenous artists, working on the concept, making sure that if there's travel and anything that the Indigenous artists may need to come here and complete the work, that we are supporting them and they have a really great experience helping us increase the visibility of Indigenous people in the city.
And for those people listening right now who would like to participate, who would like to contribute, what's the greatest need that First Light has at the moment?
The greatest need that we have at the moment, that's a tough question because, like I said, we have so many different teams doing such great work, but we're all coming together, towards the same mission. What I'm going to say right now, with Orange Shirt Day coming up, September 30th, National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, it's right around the corner. I think that education is always the first step. So if you want to support Indigenous community members, you want to get involved, First Light is actually going to have a store at the Avalon Mall where we're going to have staff on site educating about what Orange Shirt Day is. We're going to have orange shirts there for sale. 100% of the profits will go towards our residential school survivor memorial garden. That's going to be at our new location. There's going to be some artwork there. So I would say if people are interested in getting involved, it's going to be there starting September 22nd. If people wanted to pop by the Avalon Mall, check it out, talk to our staff, ask more questions of how you're interested in getting involved, or just get a little bit of education about what Orange Shirt Day and National Day of Truth and Reconciliation means, it would be great.
Fantastic. And people can also donate. We'll put a link to do that in the show notes here. Now you talk about education. You guys have a preschool center. You have a school age program. Tell me a little bit about those. What was the genesis of those and what services do they provide?
Yeah, so every stage of life, really. A lot of great programs and services that are recreational, but then a lot that are needed for our community. I talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs earlier. So food programs, hygiene, support programs. We love to have traditional wild meats. We have a community freezer. We try to make sure that we're able to provide wild food, traditional food to our community members when necessary, as much as possible. Cultural programs, like I said, all kinds, really what you can think about, truly wrap around. But we want to make sure that our community members have food, roof over their head, and a support network, I think are really most important.
Oh, wonderful. I hope that everyone is able to get those things in the future, because it is so important to have those wraparound services, but hopefully one day they won't be needed, right?
Absolutely. That's the goal. We're trying to work ourselves out of a job.
Yes. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that. Stacey, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, and best of luck with the ribbon cutting. I hope it all goes terrifically well this morning.
Thank you so much, Eric. It was a pleasure. Take care.
Thanks to Stacey Howse for taking the time to speak with me today, to First Light for the work they're doing in St. John's, and to you at home for listening, streaming, and sharing today's episode. Check the show notes for ways to get involved and help First Light with the important work they're doing. Mindful is written, hosted, and published by me, Eric Bowman. Our editor and producer is Jamie Montgomery, and our theme music is Avenues by David Taylor.